The rain fell in sheets across Oakwood Cemetery, turning the freshly dug soil into mud that clung to Martin's boots like guilt. For 15 years, he tended these grounds, watching the living mourn and the dead rest. But the homeless man at plot 237 was different. Every night for 3 years, regardless of weather, the ragged figure slept beside that particular headstone, whispering to it as if the grave might answer back. Martin had reported him twice before giving up. Some connections, he realized, transcended both life and death. Don't forget to subscribe to hear what secrets the rain finally reveals. The cemetery had become Martin's sanctuary as much as it was his workplace. At 53, his weathered hands had lowered countless caskets into the earth, his back permanently curved from decades of digging. The groundskeeper position wasn't what he dreamed of as a young man with aspirations of becoming a counselor, but after his wife Sarah's death 15 years ago, helping others find peace in their grief felt too raw, too close to his own unhealed wound. Martin lived alone in the small cottage at the edge of the cemetery grounds, his evenings spent with books and bourbon, the silence broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl. His colleagues at the cemetery management office treated him with professional courtesy but little warmth. To them, he was just the quiet gravedigger who preferred the company of tombstones to people. The wound that festered within him wasn't just Sarah's passing, but the circumstances surrounding it. She had died alone in their home while he worked a double shift, a heart attack taking her without warning. The guilt of not being there had hollowed him out, leaving a man who functioned but rarely lived. His simple goal each day was to maintain dignity for those in his care, both the deceased and their mourners. He took pride in perfectly aligned headstones and immaculate pathways, believing that order in death might offer comfort to the living. This dedication made the cemetery board's recent decision all the more humiliating. During their monthly public meeting, the new director, Bradley Winters, had singled Martin out. Our groundskeeper seems to believe that cemetery policy doesn't apply to him, Winters had announced to the room of stakeholders. Allowing vagrants to sleep on our premium plots shows a disturbing lack of judgment. Martin had tried to explain about the homeless man at plot 237, how the man harmed nothing and no one, but Winters cut him off. Your job is to maintain standards, not make exceptions for every sob story. Either remove the vagrant permanently, or we'll find someone who respects our establishment's reputation. The room had fallen silent, faces turning toward Martin with mixtures of pity and judgment. In that moment, he realized how little power he held, a mere gravedigger challenging the authority of those who saw the cemetery not as sacred ground but as a business venture. The rain had barely let up the following morning when Martin spotted Bradley Winters' luxury sedan pulling into the cemetery. The director stepped out wearing an expensive raincoat, his leather shoes immediately sinking into the mud. Martin continued raking leaves, pretending not to notice. "Martin," Winters called, his voice carrying across the silent grounds. "A word, please." Martin approached slowly, conscious of his mud-caked boots and rain-soaked jacket. "I've received another complaint about your homeless friend," Winters said, not bothering with pleasantries. "Mrs. Harrington was visiting her husband's grave yesterday and felt threatened." "He doesn't threaten anyone," Martin replied quietly. "He just sits there." Winters' smile tightened. "The board has decided to install security cameras at the main entrance and around the premium plots. They'll be operational by next week." He handed Martin a small stack of laminated signs. "Post these today. Trespassers will be prosecuted." Martin took the signs, feeling the weight of them in his calloused hands. "The man is grieving, Bradley, just like everyone else who comes here." "The difference is," Winters replied, checking his watch, "everyone else leaves before nightfall, and everyone else pays for the privilege of visiting." As Winters walked away, Martin noticed several board members watching from their cars. They'd come to witness his humiliation, to ensure he understood his place. 3 days later, Martin found himself standing before the entire cemetery board in their wood-paneled meeting room. The homeless man had been spotted again, despite the new signs and Martin's half-hearted attempts to enforce them. "We've reviewed the security footage," Winters announced, clicking a remote. The projector displayed a grainy nighttime image of Martin approaching the homeless man at plot 237, then walking away without escorting him out. "Would you care to explain why you're deliberately ignoring board directives?" Winters asked, his voice dripping with false concern. Martin cleared his throat. "I asked him to leave. He said he would after saying good night to his." "Your job isn't to negotiate with trespassers," interrupted Mrs. Harrington, pearl necklace gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "It's to remove them. Perhaps, suggested another board member, Martin's age is affecting his ability to perform his duties. Confrontation requires a certain firmness. The room filled with murmurs of agreement. Martin stood silently, his dignity eroding with each whispered comment. "We're placing you on probation," Winters declared. "One more incident, and we'll be forced to reconsider your position here." The final humiliation came a week later, during the annual Memorial Day service. Hundreds of visitors filled the cemetery, placing flowers and flags on graves of veterans. Martin had spent days preparing the grounds, ensuring everything was perfect. As the mayor concluded his speech, Winters took the microphone. "Before we close, a security announcement. We've been experiencing issues with unauthorized persons on the grounds after hours." His eyes found Martin in the crowd. "Our staff has been instructed to enforce strict access policies. If you see anyone who doesn't belong, please alert security immediately." Several people turned to stare at Martin. A whisper rippled through the crowd. "That's him, the one who lets homeless people sleep here." Later, as Martin collected discarded programs and wilted flowers, he overheard two security guards laughing. "Old man's getting fired for sure," one said. "Winters already has his replacement lined up." Martin said nothing, continuing his work with methodical precision. What none of them knew, not Winters, not the board, not the security guards, was that before becoming a gravedigger, Martin had spent 12 years as a paralegal specializing in property law and historical land grants. He'd been researching the cemetery's founding documents in the county archives, discovering something that would shake Winters' authority to its core. The plot where the homeless man slept wasn't owned by the Cemetery Association at all. It belonged to the city under a special covenant that guaranteed public access, day or night, in perpetuity. Martin tucked this knowledge away, continuing his work in silence. Some battles required patience, and he had learned to wait. That evening, Mayor Eleanor Blackwood watched from her car as Martin locked the cemetery gates. She'd reviewed the old land grants herself. "Interesting move, Mr. Winters," she murmured, tapping a folder on her dashboard. "Very interesting indeed." The rain fell in sheets across Oakwood Cemetery, turning the manicured paths into muddy rivulets. Martin stood beneath the shelter of the maintenance shed, watching droplets cascade from the rusty gutters. Tonight would be miserable for anyone caught outdoors, especially someone with nowhere to go. He thought of the homeless man by plot 237, wondering if he'd sought refuge elsewhere. The temperature had dropped considerably, and hypothermia was a real concern on nights like these. Martin's gaze drifted to the small desk in the corner of the shed where a manila folder lay. Inside were the fruits of his research, property records, historical land grants, and the original cemetery charter from 1887. For weeks, he'd spent his lunch breaks at the county records office, piecing together the true ownership status of Plot 237 and the surrounding area. What he'd discovered was remarkable. The southeastern quarter of the cemetery, including Plot 237, had been donated to the city by the Harrington family with specific conditions. It would remain accessible to the public at all hours as a place of remembrance and reflection. The Cemetery Association merely maintained the grounds under a stewardship agreement. Martin slipped the documents into a waterproof bag and tucked them inside his raincoat. He'd waited long enough. Tomorrow was the monthly board meeting, the perfect opportunity to present his findings. As he locked the shed, his phone buzzed with a weather alert, flash flood warning for the county. Martin frowned, thinking of the homeless man again. Conscience overriding caution, he decided to check Plot 237 before heading home. The rain hammered against his hood as he trudged through the cemetery. When he reached the familiar grave, he was surprised to find the homeless man huddled beneath a tattered tarp, shivering violently. "Sir," Martin called over the downpour, "you can't stay here tonight." "It's dangerous." The man looked up, his face haggard. "Can't leave her," he mumbled. Martin made a decision that would either save his job or end it. "Come with me, just for tonight." After initial resistance, the man finally nodded, gathering his few possessions. As they walked toward the cemetery entrance, Martin asked, "What's your name, sir?" "Thomas," the man replied, his voice barely audible above the storm. "Thomas Harrington." Martin stopped in his tracks, the surname registering immediately. "Harrington, like the family that donated the land." Thomas nodded wearily. "My great-grandfather." Not that it matters now. The pieces began falling into place in Martin's mind as he led Thomas to his car. The next morning, Martin arrived at the board meeting early, setting his materials at his usual spot at the far end of the table. Board members filtered in, their conversations hushed as they noticed his presence. Winters entered last, his tailored suit a stark contrast to Martin's modest attire. "Let's begin," Winters announced, shuffling his papers. First item, security protocols and staff compliance. Martin knew this was directed at him. He waited patiently through Winters' thinly veiled criticisms and the board's nodding agreement. When the floor opened for discussion, Martin raised his hand. "Mr. Winters, before we continue, I'd like to present some information relevant to our security policies." Winters' smile tightened. "This isn't the time for grievances, Martin." "It's not a grievance," Martin replied calmly, sliding copies of his research across the table. "It's a matter of legal ownership and historical record." The room fell silent as board members began examining the documents. "As you can see," Martin continued, "the southeastern quarter of Oakwood Cemetery, including Plot 237, was donated to the city by the Harrington family in 1887 with specific conditions. The land was to remain accessible to the public at all hours as a place of remembrance and reflection." Mrs. Harrington adjusted her glasses, scrutinizing the documents. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that our current security policies violate the terms of the original land grant. The Cemetery Association doesn't own that section. We merely maintain it under a stewardship agreement with the city." Winter's face flushed. "This is absurd. These documents could be fabricated. There's certified copies from the county records office," Martin replied. "You're welcome to verify them yourself." The board members exchanged uneasy glances. "Furthermore," Martin continued, "I've discovered something else." He produced a photograph of a weathered headstone. "The grave at Plot 237, the one our homeless visitor frequents, belongs to Elizabeth Harrington, who died in 1978. Mrs. Harrington's hand flew to her pearls. "Harrington? Any relation to our family?" "Yes," Martin said. "Elizabeth was the wife of William Harrington Jr., grandson of your family's patriarch. And the man who visits her grave is their son, Thomas Harrington." The revelation sent a ripple through the room. Mrs. Harrington's face paled. That's impossible," she stammered. "Thomas disappeared decades ago. The family presumed him dead." "He's very much alive," Martin said. "And he's been visiting his mother's grave for years." Winters slammed his palm on the table. "Even if this is true, it doesn't change our security protocols. We can't have vagrants sleeping on cemetery grounds, family connection or not." "Actually," came a voice from the doorway, "it changes everything." Mayor Eleanor Blackwood stood in the entrance, a leather portfolio tucked under her arm. The board members rose in surprise. "Madam Mayor," Winters said, his voice strained with forced cordiality. "This is a private meeting." "A meeting about public land," she corrected, approaching the table. "I've reviewed Mr. Sullivan's findings myself. They're entirely accurate." She opened her portfolio, extracting additional documents. "The city has been remiss in enforcing the terms of the Harrington grant. That ends today." Winters' confidence visibly crumbled. "With all due respect, Madam Mayor, the Cemetery Association has managed these grounds for generations. And you've done an admirable job," she acknowledged. "But you've overstepped your authority regarding access restrictions. The southeastern quarter must remain open to the public, day and night, as stipulated in the original grant." She turned to Martin. "Mr. Sullivan, the city appreciates your diligence in this matter. Your historical knowledge has been invaluable." Martin nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. "As for Thomas Harrington," the mayor continued, "I've arranged temporary housing and medical care. Once he's stabilized, we can discuss his rightful place in the community." Mrs. Harrington stood, her composure regained. "I'd like to meet him. If he's truly family." The meeting adjourned with Winters uncharacteristically silent. As board members filed out, Mayor Blackwood lingered, waiting until she and Martin were alone. "That was quite the revelation, Mr. Sullivan," she said. "Though I suspect you've been sitting on this information for some time." Martin smiled slightly. "I wanted to be thorough. Your background in paralegal work served you well," she observed. "Yes, I know about your previous career. Did you think I endorsed your hiring at the cemetery without looking into your background?" Martin's surprise must have shown on his face. "When the previous gravedigger retired, I suggested your name to the board," she explained. "Winters was against it, thought you were overqualified." "I insisted." "Why?" Martin asked. "Institutions need watchdogs, Mr. Sullivan. People who understand both the letter and spirit of the law. She gathered her documents. The city will be reviewing the cemetery's governance structure in the coming months. We'll need someone with your expertise to ensure historical covenants are respected. As she turned to leave, she added, "Oh, and your probation is hereby lifted. I've already informed the board." Martin watched her go, a sense of vindication warming him despite the cool air. Outside the window, he could see the cemetery grounds, peaceful under the morning sun. Somewhere out there was plot 237, where his son had kept vigil for his mother all these years. Some battles required patience, Martin reflected. And sometimes justice arrived in unexpected ways. What about you? Have you ever stood up for what's right, even when it was difficult? Comment below and tell us where you're watching from. I'd love to hear your stories of quiet courage from around the world. The next morning, Martin found an envelope on his desk containing old photographs of himself at protest rallies and a note. "Winters knows about your arrest record. The board meeting was just the beginning. He's coming for both of you." Martin Sullivan stared at the note, his fingers trembling slightly as he sat down on his desk. The photographs scattered beneath it showed a younger version of himself, fist raised at environmental protests that had ended in his arrest years ago. He'd served his community service, rebuilt his life, and thought those days were behind him. But Winters was digging deep, and Martin knew the cemetery board chairman wouldn't stop until he destroyed both him and Thomas Harrington. Rain tapped against the window of his small office at the cemetery's edge. 3 days had passed since the confrontation at the board meeting. Thomas had been moved to a temporary shelter, where doctors were treating his pneumonia and malnutrition. Mrs. Harrington, Elizabeth, as she'd asked Martin to call her, had visited twice, though Thomas remained too weak for lengthy conversations. Martin's phone buzzed. "Mayor Blackwood. Sullivan, we have a problem. Winters has called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. He's pushing for your immediate termination and a resolution to permanently restrict access to the southeastern quarter." "He can't do that," Martin protested. "You showed them the original grant. Legal documents can be reinterpreted, especially by those with influence. Winters has 3 board members firmly in his pocket, and he's working on a 4th. If he succeeds, they'll vote to challenge the city's interpretation." Martin rubbed his temples. "What about Thomas's claim? That's the other issue. Winters has hired a private investigator who's questioning Thomas's identity. He's suggesting the man is an imposter, taking advantage of the Harrington name. That's absurd, perhaps, but it creates doubt. Doubt buys time. Time allows Winters to secure his position." Martin glanced at the rain-streaked window. What's his endgame? Why is he so determined to keep people away from that section? The mayor's pause was telling. "I've been asking myself the same question. My office has been reviewing old records. There's something about those plots that doesn't add up." After ending the call, Martin grabbed his raincoat. He needed to see Thomas. At the shelter, he found Elizabeth sitting beside Thomas's bed. The old man looked better, cleaner, with trimmed hair and a new sweater, but his eyes still carried decades of sorrow. "Martin," Thomas greeted him weakly. "Have you come to tell me they're kicking me out of my mother's grave for good?" "Not if I can help it," Martin replied, pulling up a chair. "But I need to understand what we're fighting for. Why is that plot so important to Winters?" Thomas exchanged a glance with Elizabeth. "I've been telling her what I know. It's not just about my mother. The southeastern quarter," Elizabeth explained, "contains most of the original Harrington family plots. According to Thomas, there's more than just bodies buried there." Thomas nodded. "My grandfather told me stories. When the cemetery was established, the Harringtons weren't just concerned with burying their dead. They were hiding something." "Hiding what?" Martin asked. "Documents. Deeds. Proof that the Harrington land holdings extended far beyond what's recognized today, including the land where Winters Development is planning their new luxury complex." Martin's mind raced. "You're saying there's evidence buried in that cemetery that could cost Winters millions?" "Not just millions," Elizabeth interjected. "His entire empire is built on land that rightfully belongs to the Harrington Trust. If those documents surface, that's why he's been so desperate to keep people away," Martin realized. "And why he wants me gone." Thomas gripped Martin's arm with surprising strength. "My mother knew. Before she died, she told me to watch over her grave. Said the truth was buried with our ancestors." Martin stood abruptly. We need to find those documents before tomorrow's meeting. How? Elizabeth asked. The cemetery closes at dusk, and Winters has hired security guards to patrol the southeastern quarter. Martin's expression hardened. I'm still the gravedigger. I have keys and a legitimate reason to be there. Maintenance after the storm. You can't go alone, Elizabeth insisted. I'll go with him, Thomas said, attempting to sit up. You're still recovering, Martin objected. It's my family's legacy, Thomas countered. And I know exactly where to look. Hours later, under cover of darkness and pouring rain, Martin's maintenance truck rolled quietly through the cemetery gates. Thomas sat beside him, wrapped in waterproof clothing borrowed from the shelter, his face set with determination. They parked near the maintenance shed, away from the security guard's usual route. Martin grabbed shovels and a lantern. Are you sure about this? He asked Thomas. The old man nodded. Plot 237 isn't just my mother's grave. It's a marker. What we're looking for is buried at the junction of 4 family plots, 237, 238, 245, and 246. They moved carefully through the rain-slicked paths, avoiding the beam of the security guard's flashlight in the distance. The southeastern quarter was eerily quiet, tombstones glistening in the rain. At the junction Thomas had described, they began to dig, not into any grave but into the narrow space where the 4 plots met. The soil was heavy with rain, making their progress slow and exhausting. We should hurry, Martin whispered, glancing nervously toward the flickering light of the guard's patrol. Thomas worked steadily despite his weakness. My grandfather said they buried it in a metal box 3 feet down. Martin's shovel struck something solid. They exchanged a look of triumph before frantically clearing away more soil. A small iron box emerged, its surface corroded but intact. As Martin lifted it from the earth, a powerful flashlight beam caught them in its glare. Stop right there. Winter's voice cut through the rain. He stood 20 yards away, flanked by 2 security guards. You're trespassing and desecrating graves. Drop what you're holding, Sullivan. Martin clutched the box tighter. This isn't your property, Winters. It belongs to the Harrington family. There is no Harrington family, Winters sneered, advancing slowly. Just a delusional homeless man and a disgraced activist playing detective. Thomas stepped forward, rain streaming down his face. I'm Thomas Harrington, and you've been stealing from my family for decades. Winters laughed coldly. Even if that box contains what you think it does, no court will accept evidence obtained by grave robbing. Now hand it over, or I'll have you both arrested. Martin felt the weight of the box in his hands, the truth they'd sought, the evidence that could restore Thomas's legacy and expose Winters' fraud. But Winters was right about one thing. Illegally obtained evidence would be worthless. Almost. Thomas, Martin said quietly, do you trust me? The old man nodded. Martin faced Winters, the rain pounding around them, and made his choice. Martin took a deep breath, feeling the cold rain streaming down his face as he clutched the metal box against his chest. The security guards flanked Winters, their flashlights creating harsh shadows across the cemetery grounds. You're right about one thing, Winters, Martin called out, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. Illegally obtained evidence won't stand in court. Winters smiled triumphantly, extending his hand. Smart man. Now hand it over. But this isn't illegally obtained, Martin continued. I'm here on official maintenance duty after the storm. Check the logs. And Mr. Harrington here has written permission from the cemetery board to inspect his family plots. Winter's smile faltered. What are you talking about? Martin reached into his pocket and pulled out a laminated card. Elizabeth works for the city archives. She found Thomas's birth certificate yesterday and confirmed his identity. This morning, she helped him file an emergency petition with the cemetery board as the last living Harrington. They granted temporary access while his claim is being processed. Thomas stepped forward, rain dripping from his weathered face. I may have lost everything, Winters, but I never forgot who I am. Winters' face contorted with rage. You're bluffing. No board would approve this so quickly. Call them, Martin challenged. Or better yet, let's all go to the police station right now. I'm sure they'd be interested in what's in this box, and why you're so desperate to get your hands on it. One of the security guards shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Winters, maybe we should. Shut up. Winters snapped, his composure cracking. He pulled out his phone, fingers trembling as he dialed. After a tense conversation, his face drained of color. "This changes nothing," he hissed, pocketing his phone. "That box contains private Harrington Foundation documents." As the current director, as the current thief, Thomas interrupted, his voice stronger than Martin had ever heard it. "My grandfather built that foundation to help people, not to line your pockets." Martin carefully opened the box, protected from the rain by his body. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, several yellow documents, and a small recording device from decades past. "My grandfather knew men like you would come," Thomas said. "He kept records of everything, the original foundation charter, the true financial structure, and his own testimony about the family's intentions." Winters lunged forward suddenly, but the security guards, sensing the shifting tide, stepped back. "You've been embezzling foundation money for years," Martin said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Diverting funds meant for homeless shelters and community programs into offshore accounts. How much did you steal, Winters?" "Million?" Winters' face twisted with desperation. "You can't prove anything. The foundation's original charter is right here," Martin replied, holding up a document. "Along with account numbers, transaction records, and your grandfather's confession about how he began the fraud." Thomas's grandfather suspected what was happening and documented everything. The security guards exchanged glances, then one spoke into his radio, requesting police assistance. Winters looked around wildly, then made a desperate dash toward his car. He slipped on the rain-soaked grass, falling hard before scrambling up and continuing his flight. "Let him go," Martin said to the guards. "The evidence is what matters now." As police sirens wailed in the distance, Thomas sank to his knees beside his mother's grave, tears mingling with raindrops. "It's over, Mother," he whispered. The truth is finally out. The next morning, newspapers reported Winters' arrest at the airport. The Harrington Foundation scandal dominated headlines, with Thomas identified as the rightful heir who had lived homeless for years while Winters and his family siphoned millions from the charitable trust. Justice had come, imperfect and decades late, but powerful nonetheless. Thomas wouldn't recover the years he'd lost, but his family's legacy and his dignity had finally been restored. The morning sun cast a gentle glow over the cemetery as Martin made his rounds, the familiar weight of his shovel comforting in his hands. 3 months had passed since that rainy night when Thomas's truth had shattered the Harrington Foundation scandal wide open. The cemetery felt different now, lighter somehow. Martin paused at the spot where Thomas had slept for so many years. It was empty now, but occasionally adorned with fresh flowers. Thomas had moved into a modest apartment funded by the foundation's restitution payments and was now helping restructure the organization to fulfill its original mission. They met for coffee every Thursday. Martin smiled at how Thomas was slowly relearning how to live indoors, how to trust, how to belong in the world again. The cemetery's new management had promoted Martin to head groundskeeper. No more digging graves. Now he supervised a small team, ensuring the grounds remained peaceful for both the dead and the living who came to remember them. As Martin rounded the hill, he noticed a sleek black car parked near the entrance. A woman in a tailored suit stood beside an unmarked grave, her face partially hidden by large sunglasses despite the early hour. When she saw Martin, she quickly placed something on the headstone before hurrying to her car. Martin approached after she'd driven away. On the grave lay a single white rose and a business card with only a phone number and 3 words: "We need you." If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to my channel for more emotional narratives that explore the depths of human connection. Like this video if you want to discover what happens next, and share your thoughts in the comments below about what you think the mysterious woman might want from Martin.